Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chit-Chat Tuesday. I'm delighted to welcome Steve Higgypop, also as he's known, and it's really interesting because I've been catching up a little bit on Steve's work, and what I do like about it, we're both 80s children. And I think very similarly, it was Ghostbusters that originally got us into the haunted angle of things. And I know Steve wanted to be a Ghostbuster. I know I certainly wanted to be a Ghostbuster as a child. Although my mum never said the name for it is biologist, which I know that you were told to tell people as a child that you were
Yeah.
a biologist. But I think with the panel with me, it's always stuck throughout. I kind of became very interested in snooker, but I know that for yourself as well, Steve, that interest waned a little bit, and it was actually Darren Brown watching his psychology work that got you back into the paranormal field.
Mm.
So then from that, you looked more into other. Hello, Steve. Hello, ITC Paranormal. From that, you started looking into more the psychological angle, also why people see ghosts. But you also have a very popular and successful website, Higgypop. You've got a Facebook page, a YouTube channel. And I did hear once you're going to change your name. Is that still going to happen? Or have you decided to stick with Higgypop?
I decided to abort the name change
Yeah.
because it always bothered me that Higgypop had nothing to do with the paranormal, and it's just kind of the name that happened. So I was going to brand it to a name that was more fitting with the paranormal. But then a marketing guru said to me that brands spend millions on trying to come up with names like Hamlet that has nothing to do with cigars and try and make those words synonymous with what the product is. And I'd kind of inadvertently done that with Higgypop. So Higgypop has become a word that is now associated for the paranormal, at least with my brand. So
Yeah.
so we're sticking.
I like the name. I'm really glad you stuck with it, actually. Hello, Annie. Hello, Charles. Hello, Patricia. Steve, I hope you're all really, really good. So what I thought I'd do is go right back to the beginning, to the 80s, the sorts of programs that were really influential to you. I know that you would talk to your classmates about Ghost Watch as well, and that was quite interesting from a
Mm.
psychological point of view. But really, some of those early programs, as well as Ghostbusters and any books that you read as a child that hugely influenced you.
But that's the thing. There was so much, as you know, in the 80s. And um, it feels like each week I stumble across another 80s or 90s memory of something ghostly. So this week has been Trapdoor,
Oh, I love Trapdoor.
which again, is a haunted castle. There's monsters and goblins and all sorts of things down in the basement. And yeah, it's only a cartoon, a very good animated cartoon, but it sort of seeds that interest, doesn't it? You see it as in a cartoon form, and it's just becomes part of your world then.
Exactly. Patricia says, Ghost Watch scared the pants off me. I never slept for weeks. It had a huge effect on people.
Mm,
I did see it, but I didn't see it live. And I really regret not seeing it live because the school I was with were putting on a production, and they used a big school called Ribston Hall near to where their school was because they had a massive like theatre type space.
yeah.
So I came back from it afterwards, after it was put on the recorder, after my parents put it on the recorder, to then be told we just watched something scary, but it was fake, which kind of ruined it for me. What was your impression when you watched Ghost Watch? And just explain what Ghost Watch is, because I'm sure everybody, I mean, I don't know where you've been for the last several years, we don't know Ghost Watch, but just in case anybody watching doesn't know what Ghost Watch is.
Yeah, so I mean, Ghostwatch was, I think, one of the cleverest television stunts ever. That the makers claim wasn't meant to trick people, but I think the attention to detail they put into it would suggest they did want to trick people. But it presents itself as a live broadcast from a haunted house on Halloween night, an ordinary house, very much like the Enfield Poltergeist, if you know those sort of cases. And it built very, very slowly, felt very real. There was a bit of conflict over whether it was real or a hoax. And then eventually, in the final act, it exploded and turned into this big national seance that we'd all been dragged into and become part of the story ourselves, and we're all terrified. And the reason it worked so well was because it was a time before second screens. We weren't all sat there on Twitter and Facebook reading comments as we went. No one could share their theories. You wouldn't look and see, oh, that's Lynn Pascoe. She's that actress from so and so. You just watched it and accepted it. You weren't chatting to your friends while it was on, and I think that's why it worked, and why something like that wouldn't work now. But at the time I watched it, I was already a skeptic. I'd converted from my kind of childhood years of believing in ghosts and was a skeptic. And I remember that it was kind of presented as a Screen One drama. And I was fully aware that Screen One was drama and fiction. And I think I remember even in the TV guide it said Screen One : Ghost Watch. So I knew I was expecting fiction, unfortunately. But it still, because it was done so well and seemed so real, I just loved it because it was making all those ghostly realities. You know, even as a skeptic, you'd love to see things and love for it to be real. So for something to be presented that real just really worked. And I think the closest that anyone's done since is when Most Haunted did their live at 30 East Drive, because again, it was that same sort of environment, similar live experience. Not quite the same because you weren't as locked into a screen, and obviously the drama wasn't the same, and there was no climax or plot, but you still got that same thrill watching it.
Yeah, excellent. Haunted Scare says Ghostwatch pipes. It worked because no internet spoiled it. To be fair, I think as well what I did like, because at one point it looks like the girls have faked it, getting towards the end of it. They would do things like they would show like a shot of the bedroom, had pipes down the corner, but only just visible, but so only certain people could see it. Then go back to it, show a dressing gown hung up on the side, exactly the same thing. And what was really clever about it as well, which made it look very real, is that they would say, we go to this interview and then it would break apart and they go, I'm really sorry about that, which is all the things which would happen in live TV. So yeah, I mean, even knowing that it was a drama by the time I came to see it, it did spark the imagination. They did do something on BBC Radio 1 several years later with the advent of Independence Day and like an alien invasion, but it went so over the top so very quickly that it was obvious that it was a drama straight away. So then what would be good, because you're sort of becoming sort of skeptical, what point do you think that you stop being, oh, ghosts are around, to being more, you know, I think it might be psychological, or how you were thinking? I think you actually said that you're very much into the psychological thing now, but you kind of became quite a big disbeliever at one point. So when did that kind of doubt start coming in?
I mean, I went to, growing up, I went to a Catholic school and kind of was brought up religious and believed in ghosts and various other things. And UFOs was a big thing I was interested in as well. And I kind of, I don't know, I guess around the age of sort of 10 and 11, just kind of, I think it's when I started doing GCSE religion at high school and started learning about Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism, and thought, these religions sound as valid as the one I've been taught. So which one's real? These are older than the ones I've been taught. Does that make them more valid? And suddenly, you know, it became quite clear that I was in part of a belief system, and there's no reason why I should believe Catholicism ahead of anything else. So when I started questioning religion, then that expanded into everything else, I think, and you soon start to see the same kind of logical kind of ways of working in all belief systems, and lots of things just then crumble down around you when you're in that situation. And that was kind of the time then, obviously after school, I went off and I got into radio. So radio was my thing. I worked at Capital FM in London for 10 years. And that was kind of my dream job. But then when your dream job, like all jobs, starts to get boring, that's when kind of the paranormal stuff came back in. And it was around the time that Darren Brown was doing stuff. And it just kind of, the skepticism brought me back in, because again, it wasn't just deluded crazy people, as I'd incorrectly thought. there was an interesting story there, and people were seeing things that they genuinely believe in. And if people are seeing things, then that should be respected and investigated. So it was really because of that, seeing how people react to certain things, seeing how Ouija boards really work. Suddenly, I realised people weren't just faking it, or there was a truth in there, whatever that truth might be.
Excellent. I just want to pull this one up. Neither, I think this is to Ghostwatch, but I'm sure it wouldn't have made it to New Zealand. I mean, in the UK, I mean, the newspapers were talking about Ghostwatch for weeks afterwards. I mean, it really did have a massive impact, and I think the BBC, or at least it seemed like it from the papers, were getting their knuckles rapped for putting something that terrified people at the time. So what I want to talk about now is Darren Brown, because he's done all sorts of things. Was it the ladies in the forest that first triggered that imagination for you? Because I remember that was like the first special he did, and it was kind of getting these ladies frightened with taking a brick down from the wall. I'm wondering what the sort of first Darren Brown psychological paranormal kind of thing that you thought, actually, yeah, this triggers my imagination again.
Is that the one where he sends them into a house or something? I can't remember that. He wraps a ring up or something and kind of does an occult ritual. And
oh yeah, that's another one. That was really cool. This first one, they were in a forest, and it was basically kind of saying he kind of put them into some sort of hypnotic trance, and then sort of said, or you're quite safe within this wall, and then the wall's crumbling. I'm just going to reach down and pick one of the bricks from the wall, and as soon as one of the bricks would go, and it was kind of very Nosferatu hand going up, as he was doing that, and would sort of snatch it away, and they would all jump and freak out. Really cool, and that, again, I was at college at the time. We were all talking about that once. I think it was on just after New Year, and we were all talking about that. So when in the day when there was, because there's so many things on Facebook and YouTube, but in the day, when there was something paranormal or psychological, I mean, it would really fire people's imaginations up. So what came first? Because you organise events, and also as well you write for the website. So how did the brand?
I don't do events, so I tend to.
You go.
Oh, are you frozen there, Paul? Or I'm frozen. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. My internet's dropping out for some reason today. Okay. So it doesn't usually happen, but it's been a bit funny tonight for some reason. So apologise. Yes, so you don't do events, but you go along to events, I think it is.
Yeah, because I'm not really... obviously, I do paranormal investigation, and I like investigation, but I'm not a team myself as such, and I'm not out to prove either way that ghosts exist or ghosts don't exist. The point of the website really is to focus on other people. So I tend to write about other teams, their experiences. I go along to public events and write about the location, the teams running the event, and the other members of the public I meet on the event as well. So it's most of the website is not really from my perspective. It's to help the paranormal community and talk about other people. That's kind of how that works.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I have heard that you have taken apart apps to see how they work. So until fairly recently, ghost hunting would be dictaphones, tape recorders. Obviously, the night vision cameras came into it, but it was still quite old school with trigger objects, talc over desks, string over doors, those sorts of things. And then they would bring in, and I'll read this one up in a little bit as well, and then they would bring in later on, like the apps. And I know you've actually deeply looked into apps and taken equipment apart. So you can talk about some of that. That find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in any trade in the world, any job, any trade, if you're going to pick a tool for your work, then you need to have trust, faith, and belief in that tool that you're using. And a lot of ghost hunting devices, people buy it because they've seen someone else use it, and they don't really understand how it works themselves. And I don't just mean can it detect ghosts or not, but also what false triggers it. Because I've heard people say a REM pod can be set off by fluorescent lights. Can it? People regurgitate that, but has anyone checked that? And you find that actually a REM pod is really, really robust. Using a mobile phone around it doesn't trigger it. A radio walkie-talkie sometimes does if it's very close. So actually, it's really hard to false trigger a REM pod, even though people will tell you that a baby monitor 3 doors away can trigger it. It can't. But then the more you investigate it, you find out things that can trigger it that people haven't realized. Like I did a test where I put a plastic bag over the aerial, put the nozzle of my kettle underneath it, and boiled the water. So as the water gets hot, that obviously releases a lot of water vapor, which is then trapped in that bag. So effectively, you're really rapidly increasing the humidity around the aerial, and that does trigger it. So a big change in atmospheric conditions like humidity does trigger a REM pod, but that's not something that I've ever heard a ghost hunter, use to explain a potential debunk of a gadget triggering. So it's just knowing how they work. And one really useful experiment I did a few Halloweens ago, it's during lockdown actually, because we couldn't get out. I thought I'm going to try all of my ghost hunting gadgets at home because I know my house isn't haunted. I've got no reason to believe it is. So let's run them in, turn the phone off, all the conditions that you do for a ghost hunt, turn the lights out, set up all the gadgets and just see how they handle for 3-4 hours at home where they shouldn't trigger. And that was quite interesting just to see how many times they did go off, what caused them, what sort of noises I was hearing through EVP recorders and that kind of thing. But that's what people should be doing, really testing the robustness of these gadgets before they take them out into the field.
So what did you find for some of the tests that you did in your own home in the sort of neutral environment, and were any of the gadgets more likely to go off and make noises and say words or whatever than other ones?
Most of them didn't do anything, to be fair, as you'd probably expect. The thing that was quite interesting was I had a camera set up, a locked off camera in one room, and you think you're in a quiet environment, but when you watch that take back, there was so many unexplained noises, like me dropping something now, so many unexplained noises in that recording that you just couldn't identify. And I'd swear that the house was quiet and empty, but clearly there were noises from somewhere, and it might be that the microphone on the camera struggling with its gain to try and record something in the silence kind of boosts those noises up and kind of distorts them and twists them. So noises might have been coming from outside. It's impossible to tell, but it just proved to be really unreliable. You couldn't possibly watch that video back and make any conclusive claim about where those sounds came from.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say that Steve does an amazing job on Higgypop page. It literally gives us a go-to, amazing put together. Yeah, I fully agree. Let's see what Steve says. Watch some teams, it's almost like some of the communication devices get valid word feedback, have a mic as it seems to repeat the word spoken by team. Now, I know this is something you looked into, and thanks for that, Steve. You actually tested the apps to see if it's
because
connected
people
to the
say,
mics.
we're getting some really meaningful responses. Is it listening to us or is it GPS tagged? And when it comes to apps, you can rule that out because most of those apps that do the kind of word recognition, speech synthesis things, in the App Store, they don't ask for permission for your microphone, so they're not listening to you. The other thing is, even things like Google Home and Siri, when you say that trigger word, whether it's Hey Siri or whatever it is, to trigger the device, or Alexa, your device recognizes that trigger, but then all the processing of your speech to work out what you're saying is done online. So if your phone's in flight mode, which it normally is on a ghost hunt, it couldn't do any speech recognition. So your phone just couldn't do that locally. So you can pretty much rule out the fact that an app's doing it. The same for a physical handheld device. The chances of there being, if Google Home works on the cloud, for an Ovilus 5 to have speech recognition built in to the scale of Google Home is just inconceivable. And if these people are able to, the people that are building these devices and apps are capable of writing software that does speech recognition to that standard, they would be making a fortune at Google or Amazon. They wouldn't be making ghost hunting apps. So it's not that it's spying on you. And the word lists on a lot of these apps are fairly small as well, but they're very well targeted and picked words that do have a lot of meaning. So with the Alice box, it's got about 1,600 words built into it. And if you go through those words, if you pick a location, so say the ancient Ram Inn, and you go through those 1,600 words, you'll find things like bar, it was a former bar. You'll find pub, you'll find landlord, could that be John Humphreys? You'll find John, and you'll find all these words that relate to it. And I think I worked out it was something like 18% of the words in that word list could be related in some way to the ancient Ram Inn. So that's probably true of every location you go. So 18%, that's 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 chance of a word coming up that you can find some meaning to the place it's being used. So then suddenly those words seem a lot less relevant and interesting. But then what I did with an app called the Ghost Hunting Tools app was I left it running at home for an hour and recorded the screen of my phone. Then I went out to 2 different locations and played that recording back. So the app wasn't running when I went to those places. It was just a recording of the same set of words both times in 2 separate places.
Yeah.
And even in that situation, a lot of the words were really fitting. I went to Iam, the plague village in Derbyshire, and outside the plague house, I got the word catch. But then my other location was a town in Wiltshire, Bradford-on-Avon, and as I crossed the river, the word catch came up. So could that be fishing in that situation? So it kind of fitted both locations. But actually, it was relevant to neither. It was what was going on in my office for an hour when I wasn't there.
Yeah. No, it's all really interesting. So, hi, did I say hi to you, Carol? And Annie says, watching, very interesting. Thank you, Annie. A lot of people like the ghost box. I personally, and I was going to do this on the last Ghost Hunter Go because I don't have a chance to go to so many these days with the work that I do. But I actually prefer putting a radio on to a neutral signal and just leaving it, because I do find there's less chance of contamination coming through, even though there's still a chance of contamination. Just leaving it on one signal, then it's sort of scanning, because you're doing a lot of them. Some are better than others, but you're doing a lot of them. Hear little bits of tunes kicking in.
Yeah.
Sometimes if they come in a certain time, it can sound sort of like a word sort of thing, and it's a bit like, I guess with certain EVPs as well. You get people say, "Oh, it didn't say either of those. It says that." So it's quite sort of objective.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in as well is that because you go on a lot of paranormal investigations, and you are always very respectful to people's beliefs and what they have there. And I know that you won't sort of say anything to really kind of say, well, no, it's you're not right. This is the way it is. And I think you're kind of always sort of very humble. It's just like this is my belief system. This is what I think and all that sort of thing. But I know you have experienced some bizarre things, even though that you've said that there's nothing actually being convinced you that it's the spirit of a dead person, but there has been some strange times, and fairly recently, and I'm trying to remember, I think you said Woodchester Mansion, but I might be completely wrong. You said
That's
something
right.
quite
Yeah.
bizarre. Can you tell me about that, please?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I'm never going to dismiss someone's claim, because if they think they've seen something, then they have seen something. And no matter what I think that is, whether I think it's psychological, whether I think it's environmental, whether I think it's paranormal, the fact they've seen it and experienced it, you cannot change that, and you can't take that away from them. They have, and me telling them differently has no impact. It's better to listen to what that person's saying and learn from it than try to talk them into it not being real, because that doesn't benefit anyone. And I guess that kind of applied to me with my experience as well, because I did see something, and even when I saw it, I still haven't told myself, yeah, it's paranormal. It's unexplained, but I wouldn't call it paranormal. So we were in Woodchester Mansion, and it was a tour before the event started. I was stood at a T-junction looking along the corridor as the guide showed us around, and then a shape, kind of looking back, could be described as sort of a hooded figure, but that's not really the words I would have used at the time. But I can see why someone might describe it in that way, which would tie in with the reports there. But it was a grey shape that lasted in front of my eyes for a few seconds and then faded out. And I mean, I don't think that was the ghost of a dead person. I think something else I can't explain happened there. But I think other people would describe that situation and describe that sighting as a ghost. So I think I'm sort of justified in calling it a ghost myself, because I think that's only on par with how other people would describe it.
Yeah, and like Richard Felix, I know he's very into his stone tape theory and talks about silica and all that. Let's read out Haunted Scouse. Does Steve believe if spirits exist, they develop the ability to move with the technology to communicate intelligence in the afterlife? You can mention a little bit about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about, what your thoughts and theories are about that? Hi, Claire, and hi, Adam.
I mean, I think that's quite a difficult one to kind of, think that maybe an 18th century monk has kept up with technology, because my nan can't use Google. So it does seem like a stretch. But is it as straightforward as that? Is it as straightforward as a ghost coming up to a ghost box and interacting? Or is it somehow an imprint of their consciousness and they're doing it subconsciously at their end and it's coming through? If we ask for a knock on the table, 2 knocks for yes, 1 for no, is that ghost actually screaming the word yes at us? And that's kind of being projected as 2 knocks through some ghostly telekinetic means rather than them physically knocking. But we just don't know any of this.
No, exactly. And I think it's good, because a lot of paranormal investigators will do a night, and I've done it and I absolutely love them, and they're really good fun. But I think to really get to the bottom of something and come to some sort of what potentially might be going on, I think you really need to spend a whole year somewhere and keep going back.
Yeah,
and keep going
and
back.
I want to do it how you mentioned, with flower in the doorways and tripwires and cameras that trigger when someone walks in and that kind of thing. I think that old school Harry Price way of doing it is a much better way of investigating, and over a series of weeks, months, or a year, like with Borley Rectory. I think that's how you do it. You go there and you experience these things that have been reported. You don't go in, if someone's reporting a grey lady or things moving or whatever it might be, I want to go in and capture and recreate or debunk those things. I don't want to bring another gadget in for this to then spew out words, because that's not what was reported in the first case. All right, a ghost box works here, but that doesn't prove the grey lady or the poltergeist activity.
Yeah, exactly. Patricia says, do you believe in stone tape theory? Or maybe I could also put, what's your thoughts and feelings on stone tape theory that Richard Felix absolutely loves?
Stone tape theory makes more sense to me than a lot of things. It does, because if we're talking about things kind of being kind of subconscious projections, maybe it's possible that some kind of psychic energy can be left behind and can be picked up on. I find aspects of it difficult from a scientific standpoint, because you can't make a linear recording of something on a solid piece of rock. Tape moves, so you don't just get an imprint because it's moving. You've got an axis of time as well. You don't get that in a rock. So if you recorded on a rock, it would record everything in one go. Then if it spat it out, it would spit it all out in one go. So I find that difficult, unless it's, again, some kind of psychic sense coming from the rock, and the brain's then able to slow it down and order it and sort it into some kind of something that makes sense. But also, to broadcast, you need power, and the stone in the building doesn't have any ongoing energy that would be capable of broadcasting its recordings forever. So I think to use stone tape theory to explain energies and memories being trapped makes sense, but the scientific mechanics of how it works are completely flawed.
I mean, also as well, it could be some sort of time slip going on, because you do
Yeah.
hear reports of people seeing bizarre cars of the future. And when I have said this to people, I've had a couple of people's eyes have rolled, but I think it's worth just putting it out there, is that in medieval times there were reports of flying crosses in the sky. So maybe it could be, the airplanes that they're seeing. So maybe UFOs are like ghost
Mm.
travel of the future or something. We don't know.
But
Steve
then I
says, "What?"
wonder as well if, sorry,
That's all right.
if we're all going to 30 East Drive on a Saturday night, and 10 of us are sat there in a circle, focusing our energy on a single room, saying, communicate with us. But that's happening every week in, week out, year in, year out. Could it be possible that actually, when we're saying, give us 2 knocks for yes, it's actually the subconscious energy of another team of ghost hunters from the past or the future that are answering those questions, and they're having a dialogue with each other through time without even realizing it?
It could potentially be, definitely. A nice thought. Steve says, "What's your view on 28-day theory?" I know the horror film. Am I missing something there? Do you know what
The
28-day
28
theory
day
is?
theory is from the new Netflix show 28 Days Haunted. And
Right,
apparently, it
okay.
was a theory proposed by Ed and Lorraine Warren that if you spend 28 days at a haunted location, um, that's long enough for you to kind of build a connection with the haunting. And at that point, it kicks off and you can register it and record it. So that was the premise of the Netflix show, which seemed completely flawed to me because on day 28, they went home. So there was no way to compare the activity before the 28 days and after the 28 days. If the
Yeah,
activity kicked in at 28 days, you really need another week after to see what the
yeah,
difference is.
yeah,
But I think it's definitely a valid thing. I think if you're going to a haunted location, to spend a month there or 28 days there, after a few days, you're going to know when the pipes creak, which floorboards creak, and all the natural noises and ambience. You're going to have a good understanding of what external noises you can hear inside. So I think 28 days might not connect you to the haunting better, but it connect you to the environment and the building better and give you a much better understanding of what's happening there. And that will obviously help.
yeah. Let's go. Silica could possibly be an energy source. Any thoughts on that, Steve?
Silica's not an energy source. I mean, it's just not,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. Right. Often pondered the ghost, not just ghost, our time slip. The notion of ghost time slip. We actually see Margie's. Another. So I'm dyslexic. Another time we cannot actually exist in. So yeah. So yeah, it's quite possible. That definitely. What I'd like to go into, because I know that you've investigated a lot of places, and there was something to do with lights that you saw in one of them. Because you say, and it was just it happened to be like a freak of nature that just something would happen, catch lights in a certain way, which kind of made something look paranormal. I think like somebody standing there with a torch or something. And is there
Yes.
anything else that you've been on investigations where something seemed quite that was really odd, but then because you've gone back and looked at it, you found the rational explanation what it could be?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is again, it comes down to spending a good amount of time at a location. You can't know these things for sure after a few hours. So the example you're talking about was at SS Great Britain,
Ah, right,
and we were
yes.
in the kind of poor people deck at the back, the steerage class or whatever it is, the kind of sleeping area. And several times in the night, we saw just a white light sweep across some of the bunk beds. And because of the way SS Great Britain is, it's a big old steamship, and we were kind of 3 decks up from the floor. It's all within a compound. There's no roads nearby. If light shone up into the window because of that angle, it would hit the ceiling, not the decks. So I went away from that thinking that was really weird and unexplained. Couldn't work out what it was. But then I did go back to SS Great Britain, and on that second night, I was ready for it. So obviously, I positioned myself where the lights had hit before, and then when that happens, you're able to see where that light's coming from. And it was a really fluke happening that when a car across the river leaves a car park, turns a certain direction, its lights are reflected in the advert on the side of a bus stop, and that was enough to then, that was the angle it needed to come in through the window. So you'd look at that road and you'd say, well, there's no way the lights from that road would come up here, and generally they don't, and it's only in that really fluke condition that it does. And that's why you need a bit longer at these places to kind of eliminate all these potential flukes.
Yeah, it's interesting how sound travel, and probably from your audio background, you know quite a lot, because I remember doing a haunted location once, and it literally seemed like there were footsteps going right above, and it sounded like that. And it would only happen once. First time it happened, we thought paranormal. Second time, I was thinking, is there something behind this? Because it really did sound like it was above. But it ended up being the building we were in had a corridor, not corridor, but like an alleyway next to the building. And it was only that we actually realised when somebody was dragging a suitcase along the cobbled streets that it was actually people just kind of going that way. But what they were doing, carrying a suitcase at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, or dragging one. But it does sound like it was straight ahead. It didn't sound like to the side and stuff like that. So any bizarre auditory phenomena that you've experienced and that can sometimes throw people out as well?
I mean, on investigations, I hate hearing the phrase, "Oh, I don't think you'd hear that from here." I don't think it's just not good enough. You can't rule something out based on "I don't think you could hear that from here." If you think you can't hear a noise from elsewhere in the building from where you are, you need to prove that. You need to send someone there to make a noise in that part of the building and see if that sound actually does travel. So I mean, that's my main thing with noises. But I mean, other than that, I've heard things. The problem with noise is you can't see where it's coming from. You can't place it. And I hear quite a lot of people say they've caught a noise on camera, and they say, "Oh, it couldn't possibly have come from outside." But you can't know that by watching a video. It could have come from outside, and anyone that says that, they can't possibly know it. It could be someone slamming a door outside or a car passing. So unless they can provide evidence that there was nothing happening outside at that time, I don't think that's a valid claim.
And I think, what people don't do is they tend to stick lock-offs in rooms. I think it's so important to actually time the time when it all goes, because I remember leaving a dictaphone somewhere, walking across some floorboards just to reach something. And the way the floorboards speak, and because sound can distort through a building, it literally sounded like a human voice saying, "I see you." And, when I first heard it, the hairs went up on the back of my neck.
Yeah.
I was only seeing another video of me walking across at that time. You could put that it was actually the same thing, but you could tell it was floorboards squeaking, but the sound certainly changed by the time I walked across to the dictaphone. And it's amazing how different equipment will pick up sound in different ways as well.
Yeah.
And also where you've installed it. Steve says, I recently came across the theory that hauntings aren't by deceased people, but rather a chip or sliver of someone's soul who had suffered traumatic events. Any thoughts on this? I also know that you hear about crisis ghosts as well.
I mean, what Steve's saying there is similar to stone tape theory anyway, really. But I mean, it does make sense to me for that reason, because I've seen little or zero really to suggest that there's any intelligence behind any haunting or haunted location I've been to. So it does make more sense to me that it could be a kind of fragment of someone that's been captured in some way that's repeating on a loop or projecting itself in some ways to people. That does make sense, yeah.
Panoptis, hello to you. I hope that you're doing really well. So on your website, it is absolutely amazing, full of content throughout, and you interviewed people. Any kind of interviews or actual stories, things that you reviewed that have really stood out for you out of your years of doing the website?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 5-6 years now that I've done it full time. And in that time, I think I've put together something like 5,000 pages. So it's a lot of content, and a lot of it goes by and gets ignored. The odd few bits stand out and becomes quite viral, and last,
Hmm.
5 years later, it can still be being shared. So it all does vary a lot. Um, I don't know. There's been a lot of standout moments, really. A lot of the kind of most interesting bits for me are kind of projects that I can get my teeth into. So kind of paranormal experiments and things like that. So there's one that I'm planning at the moment, which relates to spirit boxes or ghost boxes, as we mentioned earlier, which actually say scans through the radio spectrum, and you hear kind of fleeting bursts, and some of those things are interpreted as words and sentences from the spirit world. So I've decided to use a radio receiver that you can use with a laptop to record the whole radio spectrum while using a ghost box. So that means as long as you timestamp everything and know when you start recording, you we can refer back to, if we hear a voice, we can refer back to the recording of every radio station. So if we hear the word hello, we can check every radio station at 7:05 or whatever time it was and listen to every radio station, every frequency at that moment, to see if any presenter on any of the radio stations did say the word hello.
Excellent.
So then we'll know that whether that word was there or whether it's been created by the static and white noise in the as it cycles through. And of course, you could say that perhaps it just switched to that station because it was aware the word hello was there and it called that up. But Spirit Box is running a cycle, so they go through each 0.5 of a station or 0.1 of a frequency band every second or half second. So you'd be able to tag that in. You'd be able to find that if the presenter said hello here, then what X amount of steps before, you'd be able to match up what they said and the same forward. So you'd be able to see if that cycle went out of sync at any point. So if a spirit did change the random nature or change the cycle to jump to a word, you'd be able to establish that too. So I think that will be really good for just bringing some clarity into spirit boxes.
No, I do like that, and that would be really good to sort of see. And I guess something could similar happen with, like we are saying, just pure white noise, because it used to be just white noise that people used to record at
Yeah.
some point. We love the breaking down of how equipment works. We might not always agree, but our followers love reading. That's good, and I think that's like the parameter we were both on. There were people from all different sort of walks of life, but I think that they're more skeptical people, believing people, but it was just people were respectful to each other, and I think that's always the
Yeah.
best way to go about things in the paranormal field. Hi Lorna, so you've attended lots of events. What for you makes a really good event for people to go to?
I mean, for me, much of the kind of thrill and buzz for me of going to a paranormal event is the location and getting to go somewhere. I mean, like with the SS Great Britain, as an example, you can kind of go there in the day and walk around it with tourists everywhere. But then you do a ghost hunting event there, and suddenly the lights are off. It's a completely different environment. You've got free run of it. You can, stop and take your time, sit in the dark and listen. Um, and places even like Dudley Castle, I mean, massively unglamorous Dudley, but being up on the battlements of Dudley Castle at like 1 a.m, looking out over the city is just feels quite special and like a unique opportunity. It's just a really cool place to be in, a great experience to have. So I'd say 75-80% of it, if not more, is the location that makes an event special for me. But then it's the people I'm with as well, because like I said, I'd love some answers, but for me, it's not about proving either way. And I've been on events where there's been sort of amateur demonologists who are very interesting because they're kind of spew out their incantations, and they've got a whole separate belief system to even the ghost hunters there. And you get the first timers who are a bit jumpy and clearly a little bit suggestible, and they'll think people are touching them all the time, and that there's someone behind them, and they'll see things that no one else does, which I find really interesting. And then you just get to talk to various people with varying methods. And as someone who writes about this stuff, the more people I expose myself to, the more topics and stories I get. So it's all really beneficial.
Excellent. We've talked about apps and we talked about the psychological viewpoint of things, but I know when we had our little chat beforehand, a couple of months back in September, you were talking about how by being enthusiastic when somebody's, say, doing a Ouija board or something like table tilting, that can influence the way the board moves. Be interesting to hear some of the things that have happened around that and any other psychological phenomena that's happened for people that you find interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I find with Ouija boards, the events company Haunted Happenings are a very good example of this. Their team and their staff are very good at getting the party started on a ghost hunting event, and the reason why so much stuff, in my opinion, happens to guests at their events is because they get the energy right, and they don't let guests stand in the background and be quiet. They encourage everyone to call out. But more importantly, when it comes to things like table tipping and Ouija boards, which of course not everyone believes in, but at a public event, it's a bit of entertainment. It's a hands-on thing people can try. Because the team is so kind of hands-on and so active and loud and lively when it comes to encouraging people to get involved, they'll end up with tables spinning and tipping onto one leg and falling over and all sorts of things. And it's all down to the team running around them in circles, shouting at them, "Come on, keep the energy going." And that really powers it. It's because there's that expectation then that it will happen, and therefore it does. And I've done a lot of events, and I've done a lot of Ouija boards with strangers, and I can't recall a single time where I think that someone I'm on a board with is knowingly pushing the planchette around. I don't think I've ever seen anyone fake it. But of course, as a skeptic, I do believe that that is happening subconsciously. And I've done some taken advantage of some of my times at on public events, and I had a little notepad with me, and the Ouija board was nice and active, and I stood back off the Ouija board, so I wasn't on it, but I was asking questions. And first I said, "If you're here with us, can you see all of us in the room, yes or no?" And the planchette slid to yes. And then I said, "Can you see I'm holding a notepad here?" And the Ouija board said yes. Said, "If I write down a word on this piece of paper, will you be able to spell that word out for us?" And it said yes. So I wrote down a word and held it to my chest and said, "Spell the word out," and it couldn't. So I said, "Okay, I'll hold it up." So I held it up away from the people on the board and asked it to spell it, and again, it couldn't. So, I mean, that's quite damning evidence for the spirit, but it does go to show that the people around the table certainly were willing the experiment to work.
Yeah. And yeah, it's good that it did say yes rather than no at that point. Gillian, hello to you and welcome back. I hope you're doing okay. And it's lovely to see you back on here again, Gillian. So what does Steve say? Do you think that newcomers, first-timers, are also more susceptible of being influenced by spirit as they don't really know what to expect versus a team who have been out there weekly for a year?
I mean, I don't believe there's anything intelligent happening in terms of spirits, so I would say no. And controversially, I'd take that a step further and say that there's ghost hunters and paranormal teams that have been doing ghost hunting for 40, 50 years who've obtained no better evidence than someone who's gone on their first ghost hunt.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had people that I've sort of been with, and a couple of nobody in the groups I've been involved with, but seeing other people, I certainly have known a couple of times for people to do a bit of jiggly poker. I think because it's fun and I love doing ghost hunting, but you've got to be prepared to sit down in the dark or lights on for quite a considerable amount of time. I know most investigations like, mainly I think mostly because of the night vision camera, but most of them all just done in the dark. The lights are turned off. Maybe there's just one or two candles or devices out and about. How much more psychological do you think that plays on somebody's psyche than if the whole ghost investigation was done in the daytime with lights full on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. If on a public event, I think people expect it to be dark. I think guests would be disappointed if you showed up at somewhere and the lights are on, because that's just not a ghost hunt. And it comes back to what we've seen on TV. We expect it to be dark. That's just how ghost hunts work. Psychologically, it does change a lot, and it also people say that turn the lights off and it heightens your other senses. It does, but it takes away arguably your best sense, which is sight. And I mean, I was in Margam Castle once, and we heard unmistakably something thrown or fall behind me, and there was no one behind me, so I knew it couldn't have come from there. And all the other guests were through a door in front of me, so it's possible they could have thrown something from there, but it's pretty unlikely. So I got my torch and spun around and looked all over the floor, and I found a stone in the middle of the floor. So that seemed to be the cause of the sound. But I couldn't say for sure whether it was, because it was dark. Now, if the lights had been on when we went into that room, we would have seen that stone there, and we would have known. We would have potentially even see it fly through the air when it was thrown or fallen. But without the lights, we just didn't have that insight, unfortunately. So the lights were definitely unhelpful in that situation. And that's before you even go on to things like darkness playing tricks on the mind and things. Is as unhelpful as it is potentially psychologically damaging.
Yeah, exactly. So we ran occasional events, Steve, and would say first timers always are more enthusiastic. Sometimes we become blasé the more we do, and it reacts too comfortably. Yeah, and Patricia here has said the best sightings I've seen have been in the day. Yeah, and funny enough, I mean, you do hear of people's experiences now on paranormal investigations where they've been in the dark. But before, because again, although there's lots of ghost television in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't really the paranormal investigations. I think the most, Arthur C. Clarke did some sort of things, but I think the most you would get is they would go around a place and take a medium. You wouldn't have like a team doing an overnight investigation. But whenever I've heard people's stories of things they've seen, it's usually been like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or they've been at work and the lights have been on. So it's not like I turned all the lights off and had this
Yeah,
this
it's not how you
experience.
experience ghosts.
No,
And
absolutely.
every historic ghost story is phantom soldiers on a battlefield, or a phantom carriage, or headless horseman, or grey monks, or lady in red, or white lady. All of those things suggest that people have seen them in daylight. You kind of need to have. And so I think it's very much television that's told us that we should ghost hunt in the dark. And it is, like you say, it's very recent. Not even Most Haunted had night vision for their lives in the early days. The pre-recorded stuff they could do, but there wasn't a live camera capable of broadcasting live in night vision when they started doing their lives. So they used to use green lights to make it look like it was night vision, because that's what people expected.
Yes. Yeah, I think the very first four, I think it was, it didn't even go green. It was just that it would go darker. But I think night vision in itself has got a lot better. I mean, looking back at my old DVD camera that I've had, which had night vision, and I had like the light that straps on the top of it to help with the night vision. The back of the room would be very muddy. You couldn't really see an awful lot with it. So I mean, technology is certainly moving forward
Yeah.
all the time. I know that on your website you've done quite recent. I don't know if it's recently or whether it was just an older article, but the top 10 underground places.
Yeah. Okay.
So have you visited those ones
Yeah.
recently and
So
personally?
between my in my years where I wasn't into paranormal so much, that was kind of my urban exploration years. So I was actually really into underground places as well, and have been to some of the most secret bunkers in the UK, and been to some really, really fascinating underground places. Some that I'm the public can go to. Others have been sort of illicit trips where we've snuck in past cameras and dodged security guards and all that kind of thing. We've been in some MOD bunkers and things that we definitely shouldn't have been in. So yeah, underground is very much another love of mine. And when you then find one that's haunted as well, that's combines two interests.
Yeah. So what would you say best underground that you've been to, despite ghosts, and best one for paranormal stories, or just picking one? Because it's always difficult when people say, "What's the best one?" Because I've had that before. It's like,
Well, the
I
best
don't
one
know.
for an underground place is quite easy because I've been to a bunker in Corsham in Wiltshire called Burlington, which is or was the government's emergency war headquarters in the during the Cold War. So if when we're seconds away from a nuclear attack, just like now, it's where the government would have gone from London to keep the country running, and it was a bunker big enough for 4,000 people, and it had canteens and dormitories and map rooms and control centres and electric vehicles that drove the staff around. So it's a really huge place, and we had a 4-hour tour of that, and I was the first, or a group of the first member of the public to be taken in there. So trips are very rare. So that's the most memorable and definitely the best one I've been to. And then paranormal wise, yeah, Patricia's right. It's Dreglow Tunnels. I've been there. I think that's probably the haunted place I've investigated the most, and had some weird stuff there as well, which I can't explain. Which again was strange lights, but in in Dreglow Tunnels, you can eliminate the possibility of stuff coming in through a window because you're so far underground. So that one does remain a mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. And how is that for the tunnels underground? How is it for receiving radio signals?
This is something I wanted to check. Unfortunately, Dreglow Tunnels is closed now, but my intention was to go back there with a radio next time I went, because again, it's one of those things that people always say, "Oh, you couldn't get that on a spirit box in Dreglow because you can't receive radio signal down there." How do you know? Have you checked that? I mean, I suspect they're correct, but I wouldn't state it as fact without checking that. So it would be good to go down to Dreglow, especially AM, which can penetrate solids a little bit more easily. But that's the sort of thing we should be doing. If we think somewhere's sheltered from the outside world, we should be checking that to make sure that is the case. And then if we capture something on a spirit box, it makes that evidence much more robust to be able to say, well, we checked what signals were coming in before. There were none.
Hello, Ryan. I wanted to say hello and thank you for sharing this. And it's interesting as well because I know, I mean, not that you're going to investigate underwater, but with the AM signals, particularly long wave radio, you can actually put that underwater. And I think that for the submarines, that's develop an even lower frequency to get down that far. So it might be interesting. I always thought spirit boxes were FM signals. Do you sometimes get AM signal?
You do. They are generally FM. So the Spirit Shack, Radio Shack ones, and those kind of ones do tend to be FM. You do get some that let you choose AM, long wave, and FM, or combinations of the three frequency bands. The ill-fated Ghost Ark was one of those that had AM on it, but I think some of the more expensive Ghost boxes also have AM on them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Kelly. I'm really good, and thank you for asking. And hello to you. So usually about the hour mark, I'll get people to sort of say their website and social media that they're on. But we were talking a little bit about old school paranormal investigations, and I think what would be good, I think now, whereas in the early days, like people that went on paranormal investigations were kind of read up on it, probably read a lot of Harry Price books and what he did, and would do it in a very sort of similar way with the string, the talcum powder, etc. But you've got a group of like-minded people that are interested, maybe some skeptical, some on the believe-in spectrum. But what would you suggest people, first of all, get together and how they could do it as good as possible? I mean, when you're just doing a night, as we said, doing a year would be better, but how to kind of make sure you properly debunk, make sure you've got some good things and good communication between everybody.
I would just like to see a bit more creativity is the main thing that I think is lacking. So So if we were investigating a house together and we were able to stay the month there, and say in the bedroom there've been reports of books flying off the shelf, then let's design an experiment where we can track the vibration and the movement in that room and see if there's a logical cause for it. And let's put a static camera in that room to capture it. If there's footsteps on the hallway, then that's where we sprinkle flour on the floor. If a door opens on its own in the night, then let's put a little motion sensor on it. So if it does, we're alerted to it. And I think it'd just be nice to see a bit of creativity and some experiments designed specifically to try to capture and understand some of the reported phenomena at the places. Because people just go in and I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but most people seem to go in and do the same thing, which is either sit in the dark and call out, or go and use gadgets. Whereas actually, you could set up a series of experiments, go sit in the garden in the sun, have a few beers, and then come back in the morning and see what you've caught. Because there's no reason why this stuff shouldn't happen in the haunted house without you being there.
I like your idea of ghost hunting. I really do. That sounds brilliant. Kelly said that she had a spirit box, used one in her house. What's this now? Is Steve going to show us something knocking on his desk? Oh, right. So
sorry, I'm fiddling. I'll throw that away.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I'm a fiddler as well, so that came out wrong, didn't it? Right. Okay. Moving on. So yes, we'll go back to that in a moment, but we'll just like to say about your website, how people can get hold of you on social media. So if you can give a shout out to that would be really cool, please.
Yeah, so the website is the main place to go for everything I push out. So it's higgypop.com, and there's new content there every single day. So there's in-depth stuff about ghost hunting gadgets, reviews on techniques and methods for ghost hunting. But then there's kind of more fun and trivial stuff like reviews of ghost hunting TV shows and stuff about Ghostbusters and movies and anything that falls into the paranormal and supernatural world, basically. And then on Twitter, at Higgypop, new content gets pushed out there every day, so you can't miss it. And we're on Facebook as well. So, but if you head to the website, you'll find all the links there, so it should be nice and easy to find.
Amazing. One of the things which I'm really interested in and wondered if you've really looked into it is, or spoke to people, because there's lots of reports on the underground of people seeing things, and one of the big theories out there we spoke a little bit before on is the ultrasound, ultra low frequencies. Have you spoken to many people that have done research or looked into the ultrasound low frequencies and how that affects the brain?
Infrasound is the low frequency.
Infrasound, that's it. Sorry, yeah, ultrasound something else. Sorry.
Ultrasound's high frequency and infrasound's low frequency. The problem with infrasound is it's very expensive to even record. So with any kind of recorder you buy off the shelf is designed to record what human ears can hear, because there's no point recording anything above and below the human hearing range. And then some are even narrower than that. They just concentrate on the frequencies that humans. So if it's a dictaphone, it just records a little chunk of the audio spectrum, which is the bit that human voice is concentrated on. So infrasound is very much ignored, as is ultrasound. You can explore ultrasound a bit if you get a bat detector, because that's effectively a special microphone that detects ultrasound. So you can hear very high frequency noise, but very low frequency noise, infrasound. Because when you got a microphone diaphragm, the waveform hits it. With infrasound, because the waveforms are so big, it kind of doesn't have much pressure on the microphone when you hit it. So you need very specialist microphones to detect infrasound. But sound that low is actually nearer to a vibration or a rumble than an actual audible sound anyway. So it's better to think of it as a vibration. So you can make infrasound detectors with, I think Harry Price did actually, with a mercury switch attached to a big sheet. So these huge sounds then knock against the sheet, and that triggers induces a current with a mercury switch. So it's quite hard to detect infrasound, but despite it being hard to detect, its influence is very powerful, because what things that do act as a receiver for infrasound are big panels. So the windows in a house are one such thing that if you've got infrasound being generated from outside, a window will perfectly bend and warp to then push that sound inside as well. So there's a lot of situations where infrasound is caused by bigger structures. Because I mean, if you think about a little whistle, football whistle, if you blow through that, you get a very high pitched noise. If wind rushes through a big tunnel, you're going to get a very low pitched noise because it's a bigger space that's creating bigger waveforms. So infrasound is potentially everywhere, but because we can't hear it, it can be quite unsettling, quite unnerving, and our bodies are potentially capable of feeling that rumble and picking up on that sound itself. So some people would argue that infrasound kind of powers hauntings and gives ghosts and spirits the energy they need to manifest or do stuff. Other people would argue that infrasound creates a sensation within us that makes us feel like we've experienced a haunting, whereas actually nothing paranormal is going on.
Yeah, I also know that there was an office I remember seeing, and there's Higgypop's details on the bottom if you want to get your pens or type it into another search bar if you're watching on. But yeah, please stay with us though. But there was an office, and they were getting paranormal activity, and the reason why they discovered that there was this really low frequency, I think they had a ruler that they put on some books, and it just happened to be that it was vibrating, and they realised this vibration was coming from the fan that was in the ceiling. They turned the fan off, and then they stopped getting their visual hallucinations. So it's quite interesting to see how it affects the brain. So that would be something I'd love people to do more research on and see into it.
There's a really interesting chapter on that in Richard Wyman's book Paranormality, actually, about an experiment he did, I think with Kieran O'Keefe, actually. They did an experiment where they pumped infrasound into orchestral performance. So they had big speakers that were capable of generating infrasound, and then they asked people after whether it had an impact on their performance, whether they felt more or less emotional, or whether they felt anything odd. And obviously some performances had it on, some had it off, some they varied it and things like that. And I can't remember the conclusion of that, so that's a really good reason to go and read Paranormality. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting experiments out there looking into it.
And I can't remember the name of the scientist, but there are some interesting scientific studies as well, which I like, which you might have heard about. But when people are shown images, and it's either a neutral image or an incredibly shocking image, but just like literally a split second before the shocking image is shown, it seems to register in people's views. So it seems like just even for a split second, there seems to be a bit of
so it's called presentiment. So you feel the future, so it's emotions ahead of time. But some of that research is interesting. I mean, some researchers have found that there is a very small but significant measurable ability to experience presentiment. But then skeptics have said that the experiments are flawed or the data collection's wrong. But that just means that, we should be trying this again. If the experiment's flawed, then it needs to be tried again, whether to obtain whichever result should be obtained. But it's quite a tantalizing little story, that, because a small but significant amount is still very interesting.
Absolutely. And like anything, if somebody said it's flawed, is to recreate it themselves and then just test it again. A little bit like instead of doing a paranormal investigation one night, doing it throughout the entire year. Is there still, sorry I keep sort of quizzing you about all these things, but is there still, because there used to be a house which was haunted, and they literally had like some cameras running in it 24/7, so you could just watch it all the time. Have you heard about that? And if you have heard about it, is it still going?
Not sure. I don't think. I mean, I know a few venues have done that, especially during lockdown. A few places put cameras up. But I'm not sure of a house.
Excellent.
But I'd be surprised if it didn't exist.
No, there must be some about there, most definitely. So I just kind of wanted to know anything in the pipeline for you at the moment, which is going to be sort of interesting. You're particularly excited about. You mentioned a couple of things, but is there anything else coming up that you think
Yeah,
are really
I mean
good?
that's the main thing I'm working on at the moment is that there's a spirit box experiment. I also did an experiment recently with taking a battery to haunted places to see if ghosts drain batteries as is claimed. Um, and a lot of people criticize that one, saying, well, it only works if the battery's in a ghost hunting device that you're using to try to contact spirits. So okay, so it's back to drawing board on that one. So I will redo that experiment with that criteria to see if I can measure a change in battery charge
Yeah.
with a controlled ghost hunting device left at home versus one taken to an event.
Yes.
So in the same conditions. But really, it's with Halloween out the way now, the end of the year tends to slow down a little bit. The events get a bit more scarce and it quietens down. So it's all about kind of the content stream coming on in the next couple of weeks is all about looking back at the year. So it's kind of the best moments of the year, best movies, best TV shows, best documentaries, best podcasts, all that kind of thing. So it's lots of nice happy end of year content coming up now, really.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I think everybody should definitely, well, if they wish to, but yeah, I will be keeping on the lookout on the website and just keep sort of reading because it is updated really quite regularly. So some people complained about the. So what was your findings of what you did and how you're going to do it differently next time with the batteries? Because that's something I have experienced batteries draining in venues.
Well, the battery, I wrapped it up and insulated it. So I had two batteries, a control and one I took to location, and they were wrapped up and insulated to the best of my ability to stop environmental factors draining them. One always stayed at home, and one spent, I think it ended up being something like 108 hours at haunted locations, about 30 different locations, many of which are said to be the most haunted in the country. And the charge of the battery was completely unchanged when I got it back after that time. So I found it to be ineffective. But so the follow up experiment would be to do the same, but with probably a K2 meter. So to take a K2 meter and try to communicate with spirits using the K2 meter, and then compare the battery level at the end of the night with one that's been left at home. But then again, do that over probably I think it's 4 or 5 months, so about 100 hours of time in a haunted location again. So
And also,
it takes time.
the time which I've noticed that they drain, first time is I went to Woodchester Mansion. Now I know there can be temperature changes, and I think I have heard that when you take it from a warm environment to a cold environment, you can suddenly get drop-offs. It was very bizarre because I had a mini disc recorder, and I still love my mini disc recorders, even though
Format.
it was a great format and much better than MP3. But literally, I was in there, and you could just see them draining down the batteries, and it was like when you actually stick the AA batteries in. But what was really bizarre is because they were all like dead, but just like you put them in a hard any charge, but then got back home afterwards, and they seemed to be working fine, which was really quite bizarre. The other time was in a pub in Gloucester, and this I know it was in the same environment throughout, but I just changed because I always charge up two batteries. I put one in, and then it came to the end of one, so I changed another battery, and then it came up as being like 74 minutes left or something like that, and then just all of a sudden it just drained down to nothing. It was just like flashing until it eventually went off. But again, I think that with your sort of skeptical view, because it was interesting, why did that happen at that stage? Any kind of suggestions of an experiment that I could maybe do myself?
It is. I mean, I inadvertently did an experiment with my Dyson Hoover when I went away a few Christmases ago. I thought I'd take my handheld battery-powered Hoover with me, and then while I was away, clean the car out, because what else do you do between Christmas and Boxing Day? But so I had a fully charged Dyson that I put in the boot of the car. A day later, because it was 0 degrees outside, it had completely died, so I couldn't hoover my car at all. The temperature did instantly kill that battery. So that is a genuine thing with especially lithium ion rechargeable batteries. They do lose their charge if they get cold or suddenly get cold. The alkaline AA batteries, though, should be much more resilient to that. They shouldn't really be affected. But the ability to tell the charge of an alkaline battery is a bit harder because there's no smart charging circuit built into it like you get with a lithium-ion battery for a camera or something like that. So it is possible that a device might think it's got 75%, 80% charge, whereas actually that charge will drain pretty quickly. But they shouldn't really.
It was quite bizarre, and although I took a different set of batteries, because I went back there again, I didn't want the same thing to happen again, because literally I had 10 minutes to do. I was taking a medium around with me at the time. I had 10 minutes to like get as much in as I could as you were seeing the batteries drain down. But it didn't happen again. But then, it'd be interesting if all those different readings that you'd need to take, like the temperature, what the moisture was like in the air, and all those sorts of things. So, but yeah, it did certainly make me think anyway, and it was something very, very bizarre to see. Even if it has a rational explanation, it was just a very bizarre thing to happen, particularly coming back home and noticing that they seemed to be completely charged and fine again. So that was just.
But then, again, it comes down to sort of those belief systems again. It's because I remember very clearly that like, when I was in my teens, I was interested in UFOs, and I used to go crop circle hunting and visited loads of crop circles in Wiltshire. And one of the most common stories with crop circles was you'd go in and it would drain your camera batteries. So there's definitely a tendency to attribute a battery going flat to what you believe in, because
yes, exactly.
A crop circle hunter who doesn't believe in ghosts would say, nah, ghosts can't drain batteries, but then a ghost hunter who doesn't believe in UFOs would say crop circles can't do that. So it's all very much part of the belief system anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that'd be really interesting as we're in our last sort of 15 minutes to know a little bit more about your UFO experiences and some of the places you travel to, particularly for crop circles, because whether they're made by something else or if they're man-made, I just find them just fascinating and just a real kind of thing of beauty, and I love getting the calendars that have the crop circles on. So if you can tell me about some of the crop circles that you've been to. And
I mean, I was really into it as a when I was about, I don't know, 13 to 15ish, and to the point where I've been to sort of Nick Pope lectures, who's the big MOD whistleblower supposedly, and we used to go UFO watching at night. So we'd sit out for hours at night and just do sky watches, which is something I'd really love to do now, actually. But I'd love to join a team to do it, to obviously see what they got up to and write about their experiences and make that feature for the website. But it was really interesting. And I live quite close to Wiltshire, so we had access to places like Knapp Hill and various other UFO and sky watching hotspots. And across that whole area, there was just crop circles everywhere. There's a pub that we used to go to regularly called the Barge Inn, which was decorated with kind of Neolithic crop Stonehenge type artwork, and then it had aliens painted across the sky, UFOs across the sky, and crop circle patterns on the wall. So that was kind of the pub for crop circle enthusiasts to go to. But yeah, obviously as time went on, a lot of those people that made the crop circles actually came forward and admitted it was them and showed how they'd done it. And a good friend of mine now is someone who made some of those original crop circles. And I think he was even prosecuted for damaging a farmer's field because he destroyed the crops, which has happened to many people who have made them. But he now, instead, because like you said, they are incredible pieces of art, he now does them on beaches instead. So they use similar techniques to do them on the beach, and then they take a drone up and get a nice video of the crop circle on the beach.
Yeah, absolutely. And for doing that as well, the tide wash way rather than the farmer loses his crop and stuff. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it'd be interesting. If you can let me know his name, I'd love to search out some of his art that he's done, because it is real fascinating.
Yeah, it's a guy called Matthew Williams. He's quite easy to find. He's a YouTuber, so he is quite popular on YouTube.
Excellent. I'll definitely check out his material. Lorna, I think, is quite pleased that you're talking about UFOs and some things which is a very rare phenomenon, but sometimes confused as UFOs is ball lightning. In your
Mm.
research, have you looked much into ball lightning?
That's one of those things, isn't it? That I don't think science really knows whether it exists or not. There's enough
Mm.
anecdotal reports of it
Yeah.
to assume something's going on, but
Mm.
I think the chances of it being caught because it's so spontaneous, you're not filming everywhere simultaneously all the time waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's many examples of anything convincing being caught on camera, if at all. So
Mm.
it's very much an anecdotal thing, but given its rarity, it could still be real.
Yeah, it probably about the same like doing Bigfoot captures and,
Yeah.
and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I did see something about big cats that you put on Higgypop. Is that much you've looked into the big cat phenomena?
So big cats I find really interesting because again, like, as you know, of a similar age, when you go back to the 90s and read 40 Times and kind of all that stuff we had back then, I mean, ball lightning and black cats and the beasts of Bodmin Moor were everywhere. That was high topicality in the unexplained world.
Yeah.
But it's not a topic I've researched massively. But I do have a regular guest poster who posts about big cats because he's quite into big cat sightings. But it's surprising how much of that still exists.
Mm.
Because I did think it was a 90s thing and it had died out, but people do still report big cats in the UK. I mean, to the point, I think there probably are still the odd few that have been released into wild when they made them illegal to keep as pets,
Yeah.
possibly.
I think as well there's been more convincing footage coming out of because fortunately now, although the trouble is there's a lot more room for fakery with
Mm.
the technology. I mean, what you can get on your laptop now with the right amount of programming, what a really good expensive film could produce like 10 years ago. So you can
Yeah,
produce some phenomenal things now if you're clever enough. But I think that there has been more convincing cat photographs and videos now because people have these devices can zoom in to an extent. Whereas before you just had your disposable or the instant cameras that would just take a little picture of a dot. But no, I remember being on a family holiday and seeing in a big cat. So I think my personal belief is there's still some about from when they released them. Was it 19 early 80s, late 70s, something like that? That it had the
yeah, I think it was probably 70s. Lorna's just mentioned in the comments actually. It became um, to have exotic pets and for circuses to have exotic pets. It became law that they had to maintain a certain standard of care,
mm,
which meant you had to give them proper food and things like that. So people that had previously kept them in their gardens suddenly had the law, potentially would land themselves in trouble with the law if they didn't look after them properly. So the cheapest solution was to release them into the wild.
mm, yeah. So I mean, thankfully they survive and they don't seem to bother humans too much. Although you have heard of cattle and sheep
Mm.
and things not being too happy about it. Lorna says, what's your thoughts on cave drawings and aliens? Because there are certainly some very interesting cave drawings which looks like it could be some sort of UFO or some kind of bizarre alien helmet type
Yeah,
creature.
that was sort of the thing that part of the thing that first got me into UFOs. Thinking that was all around that time when I first started looking into them, and you'd see the cave drawings, and it did look like spacemen coming down to, um, help build civilizations was depicted and things like that, and things that looked like spacecraft and aircraft in the drawings. But um, I don't know. You kind of see patterns where you want to see them, and perhaps those round space helmets were actually angels, or
Mm,
a glowing halo around people's head. Just think it's very hard to interpret the stick drawings effectively, or very basic drawings that a civilization made when you're separated by what a few thousand years. Your frame of reference is very, very different. Something that a shorthand way of drawing something or symbolizing something that we use now would be completely alien. I mean, even across the globe now, it's the same. If you sign off a text message with a kiss, an X is a kiss, In some non-English countries, that means absolutely nothing. They don't know why you put an X on your message. So,
Yeah.
something as simple as that, even.
I mean,
Um,
sorry, carry on.
no, yeah, I was just going to say the symbology is lost even just across the globe in the current era.
Absolutely. I mean, you can actually get in fights in certain countries just by doing the thumb
Mm.
up to somebody, because it means something very different in other countries. So now I've just done that. I hope one of those countries don't actually watch this
Yeah,
video.
you
Now this
too.
wasn't to this wasn't to you, honestly. So we're talking about sort of recreating and stories that you've heard from somebody, and just because we're kind of finishing off. Is there any sort of thing that you thought that would be interesting? See if I could get there and recreate something from what you've heard, like big stories, or from another investigator. Is there a venue you'd like to go to? I like to go and really see that one and see if I can recreate a specific something.
That sort of applies for everywhere with me, really. I'd really like to go and live in 30 East Drive, for example, for a few weeks, but
Mm.
it's in Pontefract, so that puts me off. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, pretty much everything I see, I would like the chance to kind of recreate that or explore it or try and understand
Mm.
it. Because I mean, the initial pull, the reason why I wanted to go to the most haunted places in the country is because people experience things there, and if even if it's just down to psychology, if people have experienced stuff there because of the layout of the building or the lighting or whatever it might be, then I should be able to go in and fall for those same psychological tricks and experience those things for myself. And that's the kind of aim of it, really. Whether it's ghost psychology or something else, going to those
Mm.
places should expose me to those same triggers, no matter what they are.
Yeah, I think you know, 30 East Drive it's definitely worth doing. I have been to 30 East Drive, but I think it's one of those places that you could work it out and hire the place for a week, a month, however it is. But if you did like hire it out for a month, I think you could probably also afford a villa holiday somewhere in
Yeah,
Spain
yeah,
for a month as well, because it's not a cheap venue to go to. But it's one of those places I think it's worth going to, because it's kind of like the classic kind of haunted sort of place.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, for me, a lot of it as well with visiting places like that is the fact that it's like doing a movie location tour, because
mm,
going to those places has the paranormal history attached to it. So
yes.
it's the same as visiting somewhere where I don't know Harry Potter's been filmed or something, and saying, "Oh, that's where so and so Dumbledore
Yeah. Yeah.
was." But in this case, it's, "Oh, that's where the ghost has been seen." So it's the same
Yeah.
kind of intrigue for me.
Yeah. Funny enough, I think one of the most comfortable places in 30 East Drive was the bathroom, actually, upstairs. So yeah, it was kind of, but yeah, it's definitely interesting. So we've actually hit the pretty much 90 minute mark now. Next week I thought I'd do something different, because I always interview a guest, but I thought that I'd do myself next week, talk about past life regressions and show some of the more interesting clips that I've gathered. So that'll be a question and answers thing. So that should be interesting. Well, I hope you find it interesting. I certainly find it interesting. Is there anything else, Steve, that you want to say before we finish this live tonight?
No, I mean I don't like the hard sales. I'm out there. People can find me if they're interested, and if they don't, I'm sure that my content will get shared to them at some point along the line anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And Higgy pops up there, so I think that it's easy enough to do a Google search. Just type in Higgy Pop in. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching tonight. I hope that tomorrow you have an outstanding day. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Carol. Nice smiley faces. Interesting night. So that's really good. Have an outstanding, really enjoyed this, guys. I'll just read this one out. Really enjoyed this, guys. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Thanks again, Steve, for letting us use his ancient RAM map for our Halloween special. Top man.
Yeah,
Good.
no problem. Yeah, it's a great little YouTube channel, so they're well worth checking out.
Yeah, I'll be checking you out as well. Lorna, very interesting, Steve. Lovely. Well, have an outstanding day tomorrow, or if you're watching this at night and you're just about starting your day, if you're in America or something, I hope you'll have an outstanding day. Thank you again, Steve. You're right, just to stay on just for 5 minutes. Don't
Yeah,
keep it too long, but just to finish off afterwards. Amazing. Thanks, everybody. Take care
yeah. Thank you
now.
very much. Bye.
Bye.